Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Civilians and firing on civilians, not having them criticize, but having you criticize.
State of the United States of America.
For almost 2 weeks now, we've been tracking the fighting between Israel and Palestine, between Israel and Hamas, more like. And a lot of you watch our reports, and thank you for that. A lot of you also write to us from all parts of the world, but for this, overwhelmingly from West Asia. And I want to share some feedback with you tonight. Some days we're told we run the agenda of Israel, that we do not criticize it enough for using disproportionate force. Many Palestinians have even refused to come on this channel citing this. On other days, we're told our reportage feeds anti-Semitism, that we're showing Gaza's suffering. What about the Israeli children who are spending nights in bomb shelters? We say we take both types of feedback in the best spirit. It tells us that we're telling a balanced story, showing suffering from both sides and highlighting the flaws in both narratives. And we intend to continue doing it. Tonight on Gravitas, we'll bring you the latest on the clashes, why efforts for a ceasefire are not bearing fruit, and what is China doing in this picture? What is China's game in Israel? A special report on that is coming up. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
China says that a U.S. warship had illegally entered its territorial waters in the South China Sea and was expelled by its forces. China says that this violates its sovereignty and undermined regional peace and stability. The U.S. has denied this assertion, adding to the tensions between the two sides over Beijing's claims in the busy waterway. Police arrested a key suspect in the attempted assassination of the Maldives' former president Mohamed Nasheed. The unidentified man is reportedly a known Islamist extremist and the fourth person to be arrested in the case, say authorities. Nasheed was flown to Germany last week following 16 hours of emergency surgery. Bitcoin and other digital assets languished, recovering marginally from 4-month lows. The most popular cryptocurrency was weighed down by concerns over tighter regulation in China and unease over massive leveraged positions in the cryptocurrency world. Trial of former French President Nicolas Sarkozy resumes after being adjourned in March when a lawyer was diagnosed with COVID-19. Sarkozy is accused of illegally financing his failed 2012 re-election campaign with allegations against his Conservative Party of splurging nearly double the 22.5 million euros permitted on lavish campaign rallies. Greek authorities moved more people to safety as more than 180 firefighters battled a forest fire that spread from the Corinth region of southern Greece to western Attica. A blaze broke out in a forest at a small seaside holiday resort about 90 kilometers from the capital, Athens. No deaths have been reported in the incident so far. Microsoft says it plans to largely retire its Internet Explorer browser, adding that its desktop application will no longer be supported starting June 15, 2022. This as the once popular browser has faded in prominence due to rival browsers such as Google's Chrome and Apple's Safari. Victims of defective breast implants made by a French company should receive financial compensation. The poly-implant prothese scandal, where implants were filled with unauthorized industrial-grade silicone, has affected thousands of women in some 65 countries since 2010. A giant slab of ice almost 4 times the size of New York City has sheared off from the frozen edge of Antarctica into the Weddell Sea, becoming the largest iceberg afloat. Designated A76, the iceberg is 175 kilometers long and 25 kilometers wide. Scientists say the incident is part of a natural cycle, but the recent rapid disintegration of ice shelves may be related to climate change. Juventus have been crowned Coppa Italia champions for the record-extending 14th time after beating Atalanta 2-1. Dejan Kulusevski's opener was cancelled out by Atalanta's Ruslan Malinovsky before half-time, but Federico Chiesa sealed the win in the second half. Over in France, Paris Saint-Germain have retained the Coupe de France by beating Monaco 2-0, with Kylian Mbappé setting up the opening goal and scoring the second himself. Defending NBA champions Los Angeles Lakers have secured a spot in the playoffs by edging past Golden State Warriors 103-100. Stephen Curry and the Warriors led by 13 points at halftime, but the Lakers rallied to slowly cut out the deficit. Things were tied at 100 all with just 58 seconds left when LeBron James made an outrageous three-pointer from 34 yards out to put the Lakers ahead for good and set up a playoffs showdown against Phoenix Suns.
Let's start with India's second wave. The good news is that the numbers are falling. The bad news is that there are new complications. After black fungus, now there are reports of a more dangerous white fungus. We'll tell you all about it. But first, the numbers. India has reported a drop in all key metrics today. In the last 24 hours, more than 270,000 people tested positive. 270,000 new cases. Active cases fell by more than 96,000. India now has less than 3.2 million active cases. Overall, close to 23 million people have recovered. More than 360,000 recoveries were registered on Wednesday alone. The daily death count has dropped below 4,000 after 4 days. More than 3,500 deaths were reported yesterday. It's still a high figure, but it's definitely better than 4,500. Hopefully, in the days ahead, the fatalities will also come down. What is complicating India's fight against the virus, though, is new infections. Mucormycosis, or black fungus, is a rare but serious infection. Many COVID patients who were treated with steroids are developing black fungus. They have pain around their eyes and face, black nasal discharge, headaches, fever and cough. The government of India has now asked all states to declare mucormycosis or black fungus an epidemic. And treating it is proving to be difficult because several states are reporting a shortage of vaccines used to treat black fungus. And if all of this was not bad enough, now we have something called white fungus. Doctors in Bihar's capital Patna have detected cases of the so-called white fungus. Apparently, it's more dangerous than the black fungus. But these are still initial reports, so there's no need to panic. In Bihar, doctors have found 4 cases so far. And these patients showed symptoms of the Wuhan virus. Their lungs were infected, but all of them tested negative. Doctors fear that unlike the black fungus, this white fungus can spread to other parts of the human body. It is worrying, yes, but thankfully no other state has reported such cases as of now. And of course, we'll track all the updates for you. Meanwhile, there's some good news on the vaccine front. You can now mix vaccines, take 2 shots of 2 different vaccines. Not only is it safe, we are told it increases the efficacy of vaccines. A study has been conducted in Spain. More than 600 people were given 2 different shots, 1 dose of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine and the other of the Pfizer vaccine. Researchers found that if taken together, both vaccines produce a potent immune response. The government of Spain is convinced with these findings. It has decided to allow 2 million people to take the Pfizer shot as their second dose. Their first dose was the AstraZeneca vaccine, 2 million people. And all of these people are below 60 years of age. Last month, remember, Spain had decided to reserve the AstraZeneca jab for only those above 60 years of age. This is after all the hysteria over blood clots linked to this vaccine. Now, some experts believe that people below 60 years of age have a higher chance of developing blood clots because their immune system is more powerful. And it might go into an overdrive with the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is why Spain wants to use the Pfizer shot as a second dose. Will the rest of the world follow suit? We'll be watching. And for almost 2 weeks now, the clashes between Israel and Hamas have replaced the pandemic from the global headlines to a large extent. We've seen 11 days of fighting. More than 200 people have died. This includes 65 children. And there's no sign of a ceasefire yet. All we have are conflicting statements. This morning, a senior official from Hamas said that a ceasefire is being discussed and that the world can expect an end to violence in 1 or 2 days.
A ceasefire in Gaza Strip is now being discussed with mediators and Hamas. I think it will be within a day or two. God knows when mediators will succeed in reaching this equation.
God knows when the mediators will succeed, he says. Who are these mediators? America, Egypt, France, the United Nations, among others. US President Joe Biden has made 4 phone calls to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a week. What is he saying? De-escalate, wind down the offensive. In the latest conversation on Wednesday, Biden told Netanyahu that he expected significant de-escalation from Israel and a path towards a ceasefire. But Prime Minister Netanyahu seems to be in no mood to back down. Today, rockets rained on Gaza once again. Israeli fighter jets were seen in action. They conducted fresh airstrikes. Large clouds of smoke were seen across the skyline of Gaza as Prime Minister Netanyahu declared that he is, quote-unquote, determined to continue the offensive.
I greatly appreciate the support of the American president, our friend Joe Biden, for the self-defense of the state of Israel. I am determined to continue this operation until its aim is met to restore peace and security to you, the citizens of Israel.
This message from the Prime Minister was for his domestic audience. Officially, Israel has denied that negotiations are taking place, but privately, Israel has reportedly been talking to Hamas and trying to work out a deal. What could this deal look like? What kind of terms are they discussing for a ceasefire? This is what we've learned. Israel wants Hamas to halt all rocket fire at Israeli cities. It wants Hamas to stop digging tunnels, attack tunnels towards Israel, and it wants an end to all violent demonstrations on the Gaza-Israeli border. What about the other side? What does Hamas want? They too have released their own list of demands, and they want 2 resolutions from Israel. One is on the pending eviction of Palestinians in East Jerusalem, Sheikh Jarrah, and 2 on the Israeli police action at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Hamas wants Israel to condemn both these events. Meanwhile, the hunt for a diplomatic solution has gathered pace. Today, German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas visited Tel Aviv. What is Germany's role in this conflict? It wants to discuss what the international community can do to push for a ceasefire. Today, this German Minister Maas met with the Israeli Prime Minister, the Israeli Foreign Minister, and other leaders in the cabinet. He was taken on a tour of a destroyed home as well. And this is where the minister from Germany was accompanied by the Czech and Slovakian foreign ministers. Back in Germany, Chancellor Angela Merkel said Israel has a right to self-defense, but there needs to be a sustainable truce between Israel and Hamas.
Ist es auch richtig, dass Israel sich hier...
We stand for Israel's right to self-defense. And that's why it is right that Israel is taking massive action. But on the other hand, we want to contribute to diplomatic attempts to secure a long-term and sustainable situation in the region. Unfortunately, this has not happened over decades, but that's no reason to pursue efforts.
Aber nicht, dass man sich nicht weiter darum bemühen muss.
Meanwhile, officials in Gaza are now counting the cost of this war, and this is what their estimates say. In the last 11 days, at least 184 residential towers and houses and 33 media centers have been completely demolished. This is their estimate. Together, they're valued at $92 million. And that's not all. More than 1,000 housing units have either been completely demolished or partially but seriously destroyed. In all, Gaza could have suffered an economic loss of more than $322 million. The United Nations General Assembly is due to discuss the conflict today. Before that, France made a fresh move for a resolution from the United Nations Security Council, the UNSC. But we know it won't sail. The Americans have already said that they will not support the French call for resolution. So far, the Security Council has met 4 times to discuss the Israeli-Palestinian violence, the fighting now. 4 meetings and not a single resolution. That's because the United States will not allow it. In the last 50 years, we can tell you, the US has blocked more than 50 resolutions against Israel at the United Nations. And even now, it says Hamas and Israel must work out something privately. It's a fact that a UNSC resolution will not change anything on the ground unless both sides want to. It's also a fact that permanent members with veto powers have made this body useless. So if and when they achieve a ceasefire, it will be despite the United Nations and not because of it. And here's another roadblock in the path to peace: the politics of Palestine. The political leadership remains divided. They fail to speak in one voice on how to deal with Israel. And not everyone agrees with Hamas's military action. Not everyone agrees with the Fatah's accommodation. So what is the way forward? Joining us is Dr. Sabri Saidam. He is the Deputy Secretary General of Fatah's Central Committee, that is the party that rules the West Bank. Dr. Saidam, welcome to WION.
Well, happy to be with you.
There were protests in Jerusalem last week, and Hamas jumped into the conflict and started firing rockets. And in the last 11 days, more than 3,000 missiles have been fired. Do you support this military aggression of Hamas?
Let's address the illness rather than the results of such illness. The illness that's been existing for years on end is the prolongation of the occupation of Israel to Palestine, and that's the root cause of the matter. Had it been settled by the international community, had there been pressure to end such occupation, these scenes wouldn't have come. But to hold people responsible for your security without serving justice, to hold people responsible for your actions without allowing the international community's will to prevail, and the implementation of UN resolutions will certainly lead to tension and will lead to scenes that we're witnessing today. So Jerusalem was the igniting flame, and it was not the flame itself. What's been the flame is the continuation of occupation and the existence of the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Do you believe this escalation by the Hamas was a political move? Was this, according to you, a way to capitalize on the Palestinian anger over the violence in Jerusalem?
Well, let me say that no party is in any way immune to any sort of criticism, given the fact that there is existing tension. As you know, this matter had started about a month ago. So what we have seen over the course of the last 10 days was nothing but the culmination of the tension that's been rising. If you were on my side or my side of the world, you would have seen the amount of pressure that exists. This was more of a political pressure cooker, if it were, given the fact that the aggression on Jerusalem was ongoing. Israel was not giving in even to international calls to hold the eviction of the families in Jerusalem. There's been persistent attacks of worshippers in Al-Aqsa Mosque. If you look back at footage, you will see how stun grenades were thrown at Al-Aqsa Mosque while worshippers were in prayers. And you should see what happened on the day of the Easter Friday, where worshippers, Christian Palestinian worshippers, were banned from going to the church. These actions have created the pressure that led to the reaction that exists now. Excuse me. So had there been an international intervention that's formidable, that's firm, that's capable of pushing Israel to give in to the will of the international community, the entire scene would have been concluded a long time ago. Sadly, we see that the scene had escalated and many lives have been lost. There's been a lot of women and children. And so far, we've not seen a single sort of military installation that was bombed in Gaza. What we have seen is buildings and towers and innocent civilian targets that have been hit by the persistent Israeli attacks.
Well, civilian casualties on either side are unfortunate, and in their defense, the Israelis say that the military installations by Hamas are embedded in civilian areas, so it's very hard to distinguish. That is their justification. The question that I want to ask you right now is, will Hamas and Fatah be on the same page when the time comes to negotiate lasting peace with Israel?
I think it's difficult, but who said that political parties have to be consistent in their messages? We have seen different parties in different parts of the world, including India, where people differ on matters of principles. But yet, when we come to the consensus, I believe that Hamas will come to the table, and Hamas will abide by the will of the PLO and the Palestinian leadership. So things, when they become bumpy, when they become difficult, people have different opinion. When there is uniformity on the part of the world, things become totally different in the and amongst the international community. Palestine, give the coexistence a chance and allow a two-state solution to come into being.
You mentioned India. As a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, India supports the two-state solution, and India has said this repeatedly. What are your expectations from New Delhi on the dialogue for peace?
You asked me about a country that's so dear to Palestinian hearts. Not only history is what gathers us in terms of fighting the British or opposing colonization or seeking liberty, fighting for social justice and what have you, and the Gandhis and the long history of joint struggle. We're talking about a country that is significant, that is a member of the non-allied movement, a country that has the role of a decider and a mediator and a player of heavyweight standard. So we are always looking to India as the galvanizer, as the catalyzer, and as the supporter of Palestinian rights. But I have to confess that the connection between Prime Minister Modi and the Prime Minister of Israel has not been applauded by a lot of Palestinians, because they feel that there's been a shift in policy in India, that there's been different priorities based on commercial, military, and maybe beyond that of interest that have polluted the scene a bit. So we would like to see India brush off the dust and be as formidable as we have known it over the years and decades, to come out and bring sanity into the scene. We don't say put pressure on Israel, bring sanity into the scene.
I think only the Israelis and Palestinians can bring that sanity. As far as India is concerned, they never denied a shift. There is a shift, there's dehyphenation, and New Delhi wants to treat Israel and Palestine as two separate relationships on their own merit. Dr. Saidam, thanks very much for joining us this evening. A conflict in West Asia is the true test for any world power. We know that, whether it's Iran or the war for oil or the question of Israel and Palestine, many world powers have been humbled by the power plays in West Asia. But they keep coming back to try again. And this time there's a new player on the block, a rising power eager to display its diplomatic chops. It is China. The last war of Gaza was in 2014. Back then, Xi Jinping was just settling into office. He had taken charge in 2013. But this time around, in 2021, he's a lot more assertive, both over his party and his country. So President Xi Jinping thinks that he is ready for the West Asian test. And what better place to start than Israel and Palestine? China's first move was an offer to mediate. Beijing wants negotiators from Israel and Palestine to fly out to China. It really is a bizarre offer, because China has virtually no stake in this conflict. The two-state solution, we can tell you, is older than the People's Republic itself. So it's difficult to imagine Chinese negotiators having any impact. Plus, this negotiation needs subtle diplomacy, which is not exactly China's strength. The second move was to offer a 4-point solution, and this was pushed by Foreign Minister Wang Yi of China at the United Nations Security Council. What are they proposing? Here are the 4 points. Number 1, an immediate ceasefire. Number 2, lifting the blockade on Gaza and offering humanitarian assistance. Number 3, a more vigorous role for the Security Council. And number 4, pushing on with the two-state solution. Now, this might sound promising, but China is literally the last country to propose this. They're retracing the steps already taken by the likes of the US and Russia. So why is China even bothering to get involved in something like this? Because there is a conflict unfolding in West Asia, and for countries like China, conflicts are opportunities to rebuild their image, to display their leadership, and to extend their influence. Let's talk about the first one, rebuilding their image. China does not like the headlines on Xinjiang. It hates being called Islamophobic, though that's exactly how it's behaving. That's exactly what they're doing to the Uyghur Muslims in China. So supporting Palestine is perhaps a shot at redemption, because the next time someone accuses China of Islamophobia, it can always turn around and say, what about Palestine? Their second objective is to display leadership, and this involves pitting themselves against the US. Now, Joe Biden, we know, is still figuring out his West Asia policy. Right now, it involves a lot of phone calls and nothing else, and he's not getting anywhere. At the Security Council, Biden is blocking a statement on Israel, and this is exactly what China has been waiting for. A conflict spiraling out of control and America missing in action. So what does China do? Go into a diplomatic overdrive, and they have offered to mediate and listed a 4-point solution. All of this indicates China's global ambitions. But for a global power, a footprint in West Asia is a must, which brings us to the third objective, extending influence. Israel and Palestine are key gateways of the Belt and Road Initiative. And China is slowly sinking its nails into Israel. It is funding big projects, some of them with strategic implications, like the container port in Haifa. It is the third largest city in Israel. From this port, China can keep an eye on the US 6th Fleet. They're also building a second port in the city of Ashdod and a light rail project in Tel Aviv. This will run a few hundred meters from Israel's military headquarters. Now, these are not loans, so Israel does not have to worry about the dreaded debt trap. But they do give China a strategic foothold in Israel. By 2018, Chinese companies were investing $400 million in Israeli startups. 53% of this investment was by state-run companies. Same story with bilateral trade. China is Israel's second largest trading partner. Did you know that? And Israel is China's second largest arms provider. Their total trade is worth around $11 billion. This is an expanding relationship. And peace is key to keeping this relationship steady, which is why China is pushing hard for a ceasefire. Beijing has millions of dollars tied up in West Asia. For them, the two-state solution is a business agenda. It has nothing to do with peace. What's worrying is that both Israel and Palestine seem oblivious to what is happening here. They're making the same mistake as the rest of the world, underestimating China's threat. America, India, Europe, they've all made this mistake. And decades later, the world is paying the price for it. Pakistan's ruling party has split. A senior leader has formed a breakaway faction. The lawmakers stand divided. The Prime Minister is trying to keep his flock together, but the wickets are falling like a pack of cards. Could this be the end of Captain Khan's political innings? Let's explore. I'll start with a split. On Tuesday, Jahangir Tareen, an estranged leader of the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, PTI, hosted a dinner for his supporters. It was reportedly held at Jahangir Tareen's residence in Islamabad. A total of 31 PTI lawmakers were present at the dinner. On the menu was a plan to launch a group of quote-unquote like-minded lawmakers, both in the lower house of Pakistan's parliament as well as the Punjab Provincial Assembly. So what explains Mr. Tareen's actions? To understand that, let's first get to know the man himself. Jahangir Tareen is one of the wealthiest politicians in Pakistan. He has assets worth 80 billion Pakistani rupees. That's around $500 million. He also owns thousands of acres of farmland, some of the largest sugar mills in Pakistan, a few private planes, which he often lends to PTI leaders for traveling. And in 2017, he was the highest taxpayer in Pakistan. He paid a total of 9 crore rupees in tax, which is approximately $600,000 US in tax. This was 3 years back. Today, Jahangir Tareen is a politician in disgrace. He's fighting a corruption case. In the month of March, Tareen and his son, Ali Tareen, were booked for fraud and money laundering. Tareen Sr. was accused of using his position for his family's benefit, which is the story of, you could say, pretty much every politician in Pakistan. But all these are accusations. And these are accusations that Jahangir Tareen has vehemently denied. He says the charges are all fabricated and this is nothing but a witch hunt. So who, according to him, is behind this witch hunt? The government of Punjab, he says, which is run by the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, PTI. Tareen says he is being targeted because of the kind of wealth he has and the unmatched influence that he enjoys in his party. Listen to this.
कि पंजाब हुकूमत ने हमारे ग्रुप के जो मेंबर्स हैं उनके साथ इंतकामी कार्रवाई शुरू कर दी, उन पे दबाव डालने शुरू कर दिए, उनके जो अफसरों के तबादले राइट लेफ्ट शुरू हो गए। इस किस्म के दबाव का जो नतीजा था वो उसकी वजह से कल जो हमारे मेरे अशाइये में लोगों ने फैसला किया कि हम अब अपनी आवाज़ उठाएंगे पंजाब की असेंबली में, और ये तमाम जिम्मेवारी इसकी है पंजाब हुकूमत पे, उनके रवैये पे जो बिल्कुल गलत रवैया था। जब खान साहब ने कह दिया है कि इंसाफ होगा और ये अब हम खान साहब ने पूरे ग्रुप को ग्रुप में लें, याद रखें ये ग्रुप 3 महीने का बना हुआ है, कल नहीं बना।
So the party officially stands divided. Are snap polls a possibility? Well, they could be. The Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, along with its allies, holds 177 of the 342 seats in the Federal Assembly, 177, and 181 out of the 369 seats in the Punjab Provincial Assembly. It's a very thin majority in both the places, almost near the halfway mark. And Jahangir Tareen claims to have the support of at least 31 lawmakers in both the assemblies, both the houses. Now, if these lawmakers confirm their support, the Federal Assembly and the Punjab Assembly could both head for snap polls. Also, Pakistan's budget session is around the corner, and the PTI will need the support of all its lawmakers to pass the budget. Our correspondent Anas Malik sent us this report from Islamabad.
Well, all's not well for the Imran Khan government, given that one of his former trusted close aides, Jahangir Tareen, he has now formed a forward bloc within the PTI. He has the support of at least 31 member parliaments, both from Punjab Assembly, the Provincial Punjab Assembly, and from the National Assembly as well. Ahead of this budget, this forward bloc, which says that it is with the PTI, but it wants to seek justice for the injustice that is being done to Jahangir Tareen. This is what they are claiming. That is why they have formed this forward bloc, and they are nominating a new parliamentary leader.
It's a dire state of affairs. The PTI is trying everything it can to avoid such a scenario. It has launched a campaign to stop its lawmakers from breaking away. And like most campaigns today, this one's also running on social media. And wait till you hear the name of this campaign. It is called #BehindYouSkipper. Now, several party leaders are posting tweets with this hashtag to express their support. One such tweet by Pakistan's Maritime Affairs Minister is on your screen. It reads, I'm Syed Ali Haider Zaidi, and for whatever little I am worth, I stand with Imran Khan till my last breath. This template is being followed by several PTI leaders. Hamad Azhar stands with Imran Khan, so does Murad Ras, so does Asad Umar, Farooq Habib, Faisal Javed Khan, Shadana Gulzar, and of course the one and only Shah Mahmood Qureshi. It's become quite a trend. What about their captain? What does Imran Khan have to say about this political turmoil in his party? The Prime Minister says he's ready to listen with an open mind, but maintains that no one will escape accountability. I'll wrap with this.
ये याद रख लें कि ये नहीं हो सकता कि इस मुल्क के अंदर कानून की बालादस्ती ना कायम हो। कानून की बालादस्ती का मतलब ये है कि ताकतवर और कमज़ोर के लिए कानून। ये मुल्क की तबाही ये हुई है कि ताकतवर का एक कानून होता है, कमज़ोर का दूसरा होता है। गरीब आदमी जेलों में भरे हुए हैं, जो ताकतवर है वो अपने लिए स्पेशल प्रिविलेज ले जाता, वो कानून में पकड़ा नहीं जाता। उससे क्या तबाही मच रही है? उससे तबाही ये मच रही है कि जो असल मुल्क में नुकसान पहुंचते हैं वो तो ताकतवर जो करप्ट लोग होते हैं या जो फ्रॉड करते हैं वो ताकतवर करते हैं। सारे जेलों में जो आप गरीब लोग हैं इनकी इकट्ठा भी कर लें कि इन्होंने कितनी चोरी किया तो 2-3 अरब होगा। ये मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ कि 26 रुपए जब चीनी बढ़ी तो सिर्फ ये 60-70 जितने भी शुगर मिल्स हैं इनके पास 130 से 140 अरब रुपया चला गया।
And here's a story especially for those watching us from India. We began the show with some good news. We told you the Wuhan virus numbers are falling in India. Here's more good news. Soon Indians will no longer have to wait for days to get their test results, standing in long queues for swab tests may too become a thing of the past. The Indian Council of Medical Research, the ICMR, has approved India's first home test kit for the Wuhan virus, meaning if you have symptoms, you can now take a test at home, and that too without the supervision of a medical practitioner. How does this test work? Is it safe? How much does it cost? When can you buy it? Our next report has all the answers.
Testing, quarantining and vaccinating. If a country wants to defeat the Wuhan virus, it cannot ignore any of these steps. But in a country like India, where you have more than 1.3 billion people, is it even possible to test every second person? When the pandemic hit India, the country had just one Wuhan virus testing lab. Today, there are at least 2,500, and yet there is want for more. Not long ago, India's labs were overwhelmed with COVID samples. Most facilities were forced to suspend home collection. People ran helter-skelter for tests. Now they don't have to. The Indian Council of Medical Research has approved the country's first self-COVID test. It's called CoviSelf. The test takes just 2 minutes. The results are in 15 minutes. Meaning, instead of registering for a test, selecting a slot, waiting for your sample to be collected from your home, and then waiting for your results sometimes for as long as 72 hours, you can now get a test done in 17 minutes. CoviSelf is a rapid antigen test, and here's how it works. First, you need to download the CoviSelf app, fill in your credentials, and prepare yourself for the test, meaning wash your hands. Now your pouch will have 3 parts: a nasal swab, a pre-filled extraction tube, and a test card. Insert the swab inside both your nostrils. Make sure the swab is inserted 2 to 3 centimeters. Roll the swab 5 times inside each nostril. Now dip the swab inside the extraction tube and ensure it is immersed in the liquid. Pinch the tube in the bottom and swirl the nasal swab around 10 times. Break the swab from the break point and cover the tube. Now add 2 drops of the liquid to the test kit. 15 minutes later, your app will ring. Next, click a photo of the test. And there's your result. Download it and you are good to go. This test costs 250 rupees and it should be available in more than 7 lakh pharmacies across India by the 1st of June. Should you hoard on these tests? Absolutely not. The ICMR has warned against indiscriminate home testing. So, who should ideally be taking this test? People who are showing symptoms of Wuhan virus, and those who were in immediate contact of a person who has tested positive. Next question. Does this test give India a reason to cheer? Yes and no. While the test will share the load of the labs and also make it easier for people to get tested, experts have their concerns. They say rapid antigen has high chances of false negatives. There's also a good chance that the sample is not collected properly. By now, we know that nasal swab tests are uncomfortable. Those taking it at home may not insert the swab properly to avoid discomfort. Experts also warn that swabs may be contaminated. Long story short, while self-testing does come as a relief, it cannot always replace bulk RT-PCR tests. Home tests are already in use in many countries, including the United States, South Korea, and the European Union. In the US, they have proven to be around 90% accurate. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
This pandemic has destroyed livelihoods. But for some, it has come as a blessing. According to Forbes, a total of 493 new billionaires have emerged in just 1 year. 493. 40 of them draw their wealth from companies fighting the Wuhan virus, and 9 of them have made a fortune directly through vaccines. They're being called the vaccine billionaires. Who are these individuals? How much are they worth? Here's a report.
COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
The 11th of March 2020. The World Health Organization declared the Wuhan virus a pandemic. Lockdowns began, markets collapsed, economies suffered. Hundreds of billionaires lost their fortunes. 1 year later, the situation hasn't changed much, but the fortunes of some have. This pandemic has given birth to 9 new billionaires. Who are they? They're the human face of the huge profits pharmaceutical companies have made during the pandemic. On top of the list is Stefan Bancel, the CEO of Moderna. On December 18, 2020, his vaccine was authorized by the US Food and Drug Administration, and in just 5 months, Bansel's net worth has risen to $4.3 billion. Following him is Ur Shaheen, the CEO and founder of BioNTech. He partnered with Pfizer to make the first vaccine authorized by American regulators. The FDA gave its approval on December 11, 2020, and today, Ur Shaheen is worth $4 billion. Next on the list is Wan Liping, who holds a 24% stake in vaccine maker Shenzhen Kangtai Biological Products. In August 2020, the company signed a deal with British pharma titan AstraZeneca to make at least 100 million doses of its vaccine. Thanks to this deal, Wan Liping is today worth $3.6 billion. Then we have Chen Xiaoying, an investor in Alibaba Health Information Technology. In 2020, this firm signed a deal with Sinovac to develop a digital platform for Sinovac's vaccine rollout. This deal has increased Ying's net worth to $2.4 billion. Juan Lopez Belmonte Lopez. He chairs Spanish pharma company Rovi, which in July last year inked a contract with Moderna to package hundreds of millions of doses of its vaccine. This contract has increased his wealth to $1.8 billion. Itaru Tanimura. He's the founder of Tokyo-based online medicine service provider M3. This firm ran clinical studies for Moderna's vaccine at its facility in North Carolina. These clinical studies fetched Tanimura a fortune. Today, he's worth $1.4 billion. Same as Keith Dunleavy, the founder of cloud-based healthcare data analytics firm Inovalon. This firm is working with US Centers for Medicare to administer vaccines using its platform, a deal that has increased Dunleavy's net worth to $1.4 billion. That's just marginally more than Chao Xiaochung, whose net worth has increased to $1.3 billion after his firm, Hangzhou TigerMed Consulting, conducted clinical trials for CanSino's COVID-19 vaccine. And at number 9, we have Mao Huihua, the co-founder of CanSino Biologics, whose net worth has risen to $1 billion during this pandemic. Many of these billionaires have become household names today. Together, they have a combined wealth of $19.3 billion. This money can fully vaccinate all the people in low-income countries more than once. These billionaires have made their fortune mostly through property rights and patents for inoculations. Critics say this is utterly revolting because Big Pharma is putting the interests of its billionaire owners over the lives of millions. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Always support the underdog. Whether it's politics, sports, or even the movies, underdogs always pull through. They beat the most overwhelming odds to challenge the bigger power. For them, spirit matters more than strength. And I'm telling you all of this because what is happening in the Indo-Pacific is a story like this. It is home to dozens of small islands. They do not have standing armies. They do not have state-of-the-art weapons. But what they lack in strength, they make up for in spirit. One such spirited island is Samoa. Here it is on the map. Samoa is home to around 200,000 people. Their island is 2,800 square kilometers in size. It's a small, self-sufficient country, but its location has attracted the big regional powers, including China. China wants to convert these islands into its outposts. Step 1 was checkbook diplomacy. China is Samoa's single largest creditor. It accounts for 40% of their debt. That's $160 million. Step 2 was building strategic assets, and for this, they courted Samoa's long-serving Prime Minister, Tuilipa Malia Legoai. This is a man who once said that Pacific countries only had themselves to blame for China's debt trap. So he was more than happy to welcome the Chinese. And under his leadership, Beijing bagged a $100 million port project in Samoa. China was all set to conduct a feasibility study for this port, but that's when the pandemic struck. So China had to wait for the borders to reopen. Call it what you want, karma or coincidence. But in the end, China's own virus from Wuhan tripped them up in Samoa. The port project was never popular to begin with. And with Samoa's economy taking a beating last year, public opinion shifted. And the shift was clearly seen in the parliamentary elections that were held in April. So the pro-China Prime Minister was ousted. And he has been replaced by opposition leader Fiame Naomi Matafa. She is expected to take charge on Friday. Samoa's new leader is a fighter. She is the first woman to hold this office. She comes from Samoan political royalty. Her father was the country's first prime minister, and she's going to need all this pedigree for the path that she's on. Because Matafa has decided to take on the Chinese. She has promised to cancel the new port project. Let me quote from what she said in a recent interview. Samoa is a small country. Our seaports and airports cater to our needs. It's very difficult to imagine that we would need the scale that's being proposed under this particular project when there are more pressing projects that the government needs to give priority to. So Samoa's new prime minister has seen through China's designs. Beijing is an expert at convincing countries to build things that they do not really need. Seaports, airports, roads, trading terminals, most of these are just debt instruments. And once the payments are due, China will swoop in to take ownership. To avoid this, Samoa is looking to diversify its relationship. The new Prime Minister is promising to build better relations with the United States to counterbalance China. Samoa is not alone in standing up to Beijing. Last month, we told you about Palau, another tiny Pacific island. Their president says he does not even answer phone calls from Beijing. More countries need to take this stand, but they're scared of a reprisal from China. And this is where the Democratic Alliance comes in. You see, Pacific Islands drifted closer to China because they had no option. To counter this influence, the likes of the US, the UK, India, Australia, they must all do what China is doing without the debt trap. The underdogs are willing to fight. All they need is some good crowd support. Dogs are man's best friend. We all know that and we agree. But have you ever considered that a bee too may be a man's best friend? It's a bit of a tongue twister. It is said that bees have been on this planet for more than 100 million years. 100 million. They were here before us. Today, bees help us by pollinating 75% of our food crops, 90% of our flowering plants, and 35% of our agricultural land. It is also to the bees that we owe our breakfast honey. Today, as the world celebrates International Bee Day, these buzzing creatures are staring at extinction. Here's a report.
Do you know the word hangry? Hungry plus angry. If hangry had a face, it would be this. Bees are one of the hangriest creatures in the world, also one of the busiest. Always on a mission, gathering nectar, pollinating crops, or just soaring around on a sunny day. These insects are a symbol of a healthy ecosystem, and today is their day. It is the World Bee Day. Did you know our world would be very different without bees? They are important pollinators. About 90% of our wild flowering plant species depend on them, as do 75% of the world's food crops and 35% of the global agricultural land. If we must put it in terms of money, anything between $235 billion and $577 billion of annual food production relies on pollinators. And who is a major pollinator again? Come to think of it, we would never have known honey had it not been for the bees. Our ties with them go back to times immemorial. An 8,000-year-old cave painting in Spain depicts humans gathering honey. Honey has also been found in ancient Egyptian tombs. This is Ukraine. 1.5% of its population depends on beekeeping. The tradition goes back to the medieval times, and the craft has been handed down from generation to generation.
It is our historical heritage, like one of the oldest handcrafts.
Today, Ukraine is one of Europe's major honey producers, but almost 35% of bees are staring at extinction. Habitat loss, extensive use of pesticides and fertilizers, urban development and climate change are some of the reasons. In Italy, Francesco Capuano has spent his whole life taking care of bees. There are thousands of beekeepers like him who are working tirelessly to ensure that the population of bees does not decline.
Bees have been on the planet for over 100 million years. We humans have only been here for 2.5 million years, so there's already that difference among us. They have a perfect social organization. I don't want to go on about this, but they are led by women. It is a very interesting organization, society and superorganism. And as human beings, we have a lot to learn from them, but also regarding how to respect them.
Bees are also very social creatures. We humans are supposed to be the most social of the lot. So starting this World Bees Day, let's try and protect these busy creatures. Because if we don't, we will have no greenery around, no flowers left, and also no food to eat. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
I think that's a good note to wrap on. We'll leave you, as always, with Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching. Stay safe.